My name is Sarah Brown, and I am the Executive Director of the Center for Holocaust, Human Rights, and Genocide Education. And before I continue, I want to note that our center is housed on the territory of the Lenni Lenape people. For those of you who are new to Chhange, welcome. Our center has worked for the past 42 years now to promote the elimination of racism, anti-Semitism, and all forms of prejudice through innovative education about the Holocaust, other instances of genocide, and human rights. While our programming has remained virtual this fall, our center is now open, and anyone who is interested in touring our permanent exhibit, Journeys Beyond Genocide, the Human Experience, which features the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, and the genocide against the Tutsi. Anyone who's interested in learning more about our archives, the only in the state that is dedicated to Holocaust and genocide topics, or anyone who is interested in perusing our 6,000 volume library is most welcome. Please reach out to arrange a visit. And to learn more about our virtual offerings, which support learning and teaching around the state and beyond, please visit our website, www.chhange.org. That's Chhange with 2 H's. To everyone who is here today, thank you very much. Chhange programming occurs because of the generosity of our members and program participants like you. So thank you for being here. And please consider, if you are not yet a member, please consider joining Chhange as a member or contributing to support this and future programming. And again, that's that website, www.chhange.org. That's Chhange with 2 H's. Now, after this session, you will receive an email with some additional resources, as well as a link to watch a recording of this program. So stay tuned for that. And then just a couple of quick housekeeping items regarding the program. As you will note, your audio is muted and it will remain muted throughout the program, but the chat feature is enabled. So please feel free to communicate with one another using the chat feature and let us know where you're chiming in from. It's really great when we have, especially for an international audience like today, we were delighted to see so many people coming in from South Africa to support Tali and to learn from her tremendous talk and her knowledge. And so please let us know where you're hailing from today. And then at the end of the presentation, please feel free to type any questions into the chat box, and we will get to as many of them as possible through moderated Q&A with Tali. Now, before I introduce the wonderful Tali Nates, I just want to quickly thank Chhange staff, Spencer Cronin and Ali Evans, for making today possible. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Tali Nates, who is a familiar name to many of us, but still I will tell you a little bit about her and her tremendous experience. Tali is the founder and director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre and chair of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation. She is a historian who lectures internationally on Holocaust education, genocide prevention, reconciliation, and human rights. She is also a tremendous author. She has published articles and contributed chapters to many books. In 2010, Tali was chosen as one of the top 100 newsworthy and noteworthy women in South Africa by the Mail and Guardian. And I can attest that this is a well-earned honor and should be your honor every year. Tali was also born to a family of Holocaust survivors, and her father and uncle were saved by Oskar Schindler. The rest of the family, unfortunately, was murdered. Tali, we're delighted to have you here to speak with us today. And so everyone, please join me in welcoming Tali Nates. Tali, at this point, I'm going to mute myself and hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and your wonderful, wonderful team. And so lovely to see friends from the United States, from around the world, from South Africa, and to have Holocaust survivors with us. And special hello to Maud, of course, a wonderful friend. And I want to I see that Pinchas is joining us. Pinchas Guta is joining us. And just special welcome to Pinchas Guta, another survivor and friend. Always so special to have you with us. The survivors that are really the ones that are the legacy, the ones that we do everything that we do for. And what I thought I would do with you is to have a bit of a conversation about my personal journey. So we'll tell you a little bit about my father, the legacy, as I say, as I call the talk today, Schindler's legacy, but also to connect it to the fact that I'm a historian and created this wonderful center that you see behind me. I will share with you some photographs because I want to welcome you to Johannesburg and to South Africa and to summer in Johannesburg. And I'm going to share with you also some videos as well. So let me share my screen and share with you some of the images from our center. And I want to take you into our lobby, into the foyer of our exhibition. You see our name, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre, and you see Primo Levi's very famous quote, which I will speak about just now. The theme, of course, is never again, but never again are empty words. They were used for the first time after the Holocaust, but are used again and again. And as I said, genocides also happen again and again. Genocides happened before the Holocaust with the Herero and Nama genocide in Namibia, and the Armenian genocide in the Ottoman Empire. And it happened after the Holocaust, from Cambodia to Rwanda, from Srebrenica to Myanmar. So the words that we display of Auschwitz survivor and very famous writer Primo Levi in our foyer, it happened, therefore it can happen again. This is the core of what we have to say. It can happen, and it can happen everywhere, are critical. We need to reflect on them. We need to learn from them. And in a way, this is the core of what we do at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. We ask ourselves these never again questions again and again. A picture that will always stay with me, that Sarah, you know very, very well from your visits in Rwanda, is this one. This never again in so many languages, including Kinyarwanda, that I saw for the first time in one of the early visits in Rwanda. I go there for the past 20 odd years. But in 2006, I went to Narama, to that memorial site in the church where 5,000 men, women, and children were murdered. And I went there with a driver. His name was Kokos. He had a huge machete scar on his head, and he drove me to the then memorial that was looking like this. Today it doesn't look like that. It's cleaned up. It is really a memorial. But then we had the remains of the bones. We had the remains of my first visit there was in 2004. That is when I took this picture. And everything was handwritten or stenciled on because nothing was organized. But in 2006, I sat with Kokos, and he was very, very upset. And I sat with him and I held his hand, and he was upset because that morning we visited the Kigali Genocide Memorial that opened in 2004, and it's the last resting place in mass graves of about 250,000 victims. Kokos' parents are there. And Kokos, that is a survivor of the genocide, this is his scar on his head, sort of could not go into the church. He could not, force himself to experience that horrific trauma again. I sat with him, and I shared with him then that my family was also victims of genocide. And that genocide happened many years ago in Europe. And that I lost my grandmother, I lost my aunts, I lost members of my family. The father was a survivor. And he just could not believe it. And this is a moment that I'll never forget. And influenced me deeply. And it happened on so many levels, because on the one level, he could not believe that genocide happened before and that it also happened to him. On another level, he could not believe that genocide happened to white people and that the perpetrators were white. He just could not believe that. And he touched my face actually at that point, and he said, and after what happened to you, it never stopped. Yes, it never stopped. That's the words that I had to say to him. Never again, yet again. So I had to tell him my story, and I'm going to share with you my story. The story of my father, Moses Turner. His Polish name was Marian. My daughter is named after him. The story of my uncle, Henrik or Chanoch Turner. They were the lucky ones because they were saved by Oskar Schindler. They were on his now very famous list, and I put page 10 of the list there and highlighted the names of my father and my uncle. Of course, Oskar Schindler was a German, lived in the Sudetenland in Zwittau, belonged to the Nazi Party from 1939 on, yet saved the lives of probably about 1,200 men, women, and children, including my father and my uncle. The rest of the family, including those photos of drawings of my aunts, Sila and Hella. I do not have a picture of my grandmother, Eleonora or Leah. They were murdered together with the rest of the family in the Belzec Healing Center in Eastern Poland of today, in occupied Poland of those days. They were deported there from Nowy Targ, a town in southwest Poland, in the Tatra Mountains, to Belzec, where them and all the rest of the family was murdered. Throughout my childhood, I learned from my father that one should not generalize, that one should not judge people and put them in boxes. He told me, much before Schindler's List, the movie, much before Schindler's Ark, the book by Thomas Keneally, that Schindler saved his life. He told me that not all Germans were bad. He used to say, look at Schindler. He was a German. He used to tell me people have choices, always, every day of their lives. He used to tell me that I have choices. And that's the way I grew up as a little girl, with those sort of large lessons from my shy and very traumatized father. In April of 1994, I joined this line of people. I joined millions of South Africans in celebrating our country's first democratic elections. In, of course, freedom from apartheid. Nelson Mandela became our first democratically elected president. We were thrilled, we were relieved, we were happy. I voted only at 10 o'clock that night. It was late, and it was an amazing day of celebration. But meanwhile, of course, hundreds of thousands of Tutsi had already been murdered in Rwanda. Same month, same year, same continent. Although my father was a Holocaust survivor, I did not make the connection in real time. I did not stand there in queue and thought about my fellow men, women, and children being murdered only 3.5 hours flight away from where I was standing. So even my personal history, my connections, that talks about choices, that talks about, don't generalize, that my father did, even I could not make the connection in real time. And the events that were unfolding in Rwanda in that month did not actually register until months later. And I'm ashamed of it because I could not make those connections quick enough. So it is clear that we not only need to learn from history, but we also need to urgently make faster connections, faster links between the past and the present. We need to transform history into lessons that we can all learn and teach. It is such a pleasure to work with Chhange, with a university that teaches. We also teach the centers in Durban, Cape Town, and Johannesburg under the South African Holocaust and Genocide Centre. The 3 museums teach those lessons for humanity. And we need to make them relevant to atrocities today, or else we just talk about events in the past that are interesting, but are perhaps as interesting as the French Revolution or the Roman Empire. So we do have to make history relevant. I do believe, and I know that you all that came here today believe that history of the Holocaust and of genocide are inspiring. They are inspirational, they are important, and stories of individuals, of communities, of governments during the Holocaust, during genocide, can teach us, should teach us much about moral choices and much about consequences. And that's what we are trying to do. So where does my father's story end? It doesn't end in 1945. It doesn't even end with my birth or my studies that I'll speak a little bit about later. My father's story ends in a, not even ending, but is taking sort of interesting chapters and interesting sort of turns. And one of those turns, it happened just last month in November of 2021. The local community of Nowy Targ in southwest Poland, led by Dariusz Popila and his civil society organization, People Not Numbers, a Polish local civil society organization, researched and established a memorial in the Jewish cemetery of Nowy Targ with 2,900 names of all those from the town that were murdered in Belzec or in the shooting, in the mass graves in the cemetery or elsewhere. The gravestone of my grandfather, Zvi Turner, who passed away before the war of illness, of cancer, was retrieved from a farm where it was found, it was restored, and it was placed back in the cemetery. You see it in the center of your picture. You see the names of my family in the wall of names in the cemetery. You see the participation of youth from the village, from the town, in the ceremony that took place on the 7th of November. I was so moved by this ceremony that I watched on Zoom because of the pandemic. I was moved by local community because there were no Jews in the ceremony, reciting the Kaddish in Polish, reciting the prayers of El Malei Rachamim in Polish. I was moved to tears because in the end, this is an inspiring story of how an individual and a community can make a difference on the ground to our world. So where did the story of Oskar Schindler, that saved my father, that gave life to me, and I have 2 kids, so, you know, this tradition and this family continues, lead me to? It led me to a love of history. I studied history at high school. I studied history in university. I'm a lover of history. I'm a historian. And his story and this story played a huge role in the founding of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. It took about 11, 12 years to complete this legacy. It wasn't easy. There were many moments where I wanted to give up, but I didn't. It was, as I joke, sometimes a very long pregnancy from dream to reality, 11, 12 years, longer than any living creature. But let me speak now about our center and about the process. So this is the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. It is a beautiful building, award-winning building. We moved into this building in 2016. It was still a building site, and we completed it on a shoestring. Very, very low budget, but with a lot of love, a lot of passion, a lot of partnerships, and many, many inspirational consultations with the different groups and individuals. We made a decision to tell the story in a multi-directional way. We chose to focus on the history of genocides in the 20th century. And we start the story with the history of the Herero and Nama genocide in neighboring Namibia. Used to be, of course, German Southwest Africa. That started in 1904 and was only recognized as genocide by Germany this year in 2021. We also look at the genocide of the Christian Armenians that started in 1915 in the Ottoman Empire and murdered at least 1.5 million Armenians. We look at the Holocaust as a main case study, and the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda is a main case study. But we also look at developments of the word genocide through the story of Raphael Lemkin. We look at the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which we marked just last week on the 9th of December. And we look at the aftermath of genocide. And the exhibition also makes connections to South African history of crimes against humanity, of apartheid, and of human rights issues the country is facing today, for example, xenophobia and Afrophobia. We look at history through voices of witnesses, through artifacts, through photographs, through individuals, victims, survivors, perpetrators, resistors, rescuers, bystanders. We look at their dilemmas, at their choices. And our goal is really to look at memory, but to educate, as I spoke about it before, to have dialogue, to unpack stuff with critical thinking, questions and dilemmas, and to learn lessons for humanity from those histories. And we go beyond telling what happened using the history of genocide to develop critical thinking skills, to encourage visitors, audiences to make connections between memories of the past and challenges of society today. And we look at trauma, at personal trauma, at communal trauma, and about all that comes with it. The building and exhibition is full of symbolism, and I'll speak a little bit about it through a video that I'm going to, of a virtual tour that I'm going to share with you just now. It inspires visitors to reflect on the past through making connections on the railway lines that decorate the building, on spaces of light. You can see in this picture the windows that are allowing light into the exhibition and allow us to witness, to speak about what we witness today. So let me introduce to you our education manager, Catherine Boyd, and share with you a short virtual tour, just a few minutes long, of our architecture and symbolism.
Welcome to the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. This is a place of memory and education and lessons for humanity. And in this virtual exhibition highlights tour, we're going to be taking a look at this iconic and award-winning building. The Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre aims to raise awareness of the evils of genocide, with a focus on the Holocaust and the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. It serves as a memorial to the victims of genocide and teaches the consequences of prejudice in all its forms, as well as the dangers of indifference, apathy, and silence. In this tour, we're going to take particular note of the architectural features that reflect this vision and mission. The Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre, in partnership with the city of Johannesburg, moved into its new buildings in mid-2016. This site, where the Bernberg Museum of Costume stood for 86 years, was bequeathed to the city by the sisters Anne and Teresa Bernberg, on condition that it may only be used as a cultural public space. Extensive workshops with different stakeholders, including Holocaust and Rwandan survivors, assisted in defining the conceptual and symbolic features of the building and exhibition. Louis Levine, award-winning architect and artist, had this to say about working on the project. Open quote, "It's especially exciting to be able to use art as a vehicle for recovering memory. That's the way it should be." Close quote. For Holocaust survivors, the first images that came to mind were that of railway lines, deportations, and cattle trucks. These railway lines are all around the building, but most prominently here in the plaza. And they have a direct connection to this history, as well as the history of other genocides. In both the Nama and Herero and the Armenian genocide, cattle trucks were used as transport. As you can see, the railway lines are reflected in the water below and end in the sky. They are also not parallel, and this represents the chaos and endlessness of genocide. The railway lines, which are embedded in concrete and rock, also allow the visitor to make the connection to the impact of colonial expansion, control, and exploitation on the African continent. They symbolize modernity and progress, but also suffering and oppression. Other journeys may also be brought to mind, journeys of those fleeing human rights atrocities today, for example. The cobblestones on the ground represent the cobbled streets of many European cities and act as a reminder to visitors of a continent that saw itself as cultured and civilized, but was not immune to the acts of genocide and mass atrocities. The large rectangular granite slabs are reminiscent of tombstones and are symbolic of the nameless victims and unmarked graves. They are positioned beside the memorial wall containing the names of children who were murdered in the Holocaust and in the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. Naming of individuals allows the visitor to go beyond the statistics, recognizing that each victim had a name. Images of forests also haunt survivors. The Nazis murdered Jews and others within picturesque European landscapes, and the genocide in Rwanda took place amongst lush, terraced hills. These yellowwood and silver birch trees stand as silent witnesses to death and destruction. In the foyer of the building, the absence of railway lines is symbolic of the void and the emptiness and the loss experienced after genocide. They are also symbolic of scars, both emotional and physical, that remain long after these events. Hard, cold, and abrasive materials have been left exposed to reflect the harsh realities of these histories. The burned red and blackened bricks are laid in English Bond style, used by the British Empire to symbolize strength and beauty. But this brickwork can also be found in the gas chambers of Auschwitz-Birkenau and at the old fort prison complex of Constitutional Hill, right here in Johannesburg. This quote by Auschwitz survivor and writer Primo Levi is prominently displayed in the foyer of the center. "It happened, therefore it can happen again. This is the core of what we have to say. It can happen, and it can happen everywhere. This quote and its central position within the centre really speaks to the mission and purpose of the space, to honour the victims of genocide and to teach about the dangers of prejudice and hate speech in all its forms, so as to prevent the recurrence of such mass atrocities and genocide in the future. Large windows have been included throughout the building, but quite deliberately here in this permanent exhibition space. This serves to remind visitors that genocides do not take place in the dark or in secret. They happen during the day and often in full view of the world. Being able to see and hear outside the centre encourages visitors to question what is happening in the world today and in their own communities, and to think about what can be done. The journey into these stories of man-made catastrophes ends here in this evergreen space, a garden dedicated to children surrounded by living plants and poetry. There is a quote on the wall of the space by an unknown Holocaust survivor, which is displayed in English, Kinyarwanda, and Hebrew, and reads, "I have told you the story, not to weaken you, but to strengthen you. Now it is up to you." Once again, visitors are encouraged to make the connection between the past and the present as they consider how they bear witness to injustices in their own communities every day. They are welcome to sit in this garden of reflection and renew their sense of hope as well as their commitment to action. They can listen to moving music. Remember Zakor, Ibuka, compiled by renowned South African composer Philip Miller, and featuring voices and songs by survivors of the Holocaust and the genocide in Rwanda. And so we invite you all to visit the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre to explore these and many other stories that are held within this iconic building.
You can go into our website, you can listen to the music, you can watch many virtual tours such as this one to understand more how we used the arts, how we use the story of life rather than the story of death or the moment of death is the defining moment of survivors and victims, how we used poetry and music and art throughout the exhibition. Also, what we try to do is to use draws and films and many interactive ways to activate the visitor, not to comfortably read just panels on the wall, but get involved physically with the experience of the exhibition. And you see here students opening drawers and engaging with films, engaging with artifacts, engaging with poems or music. And that makes a huge impact on the visitors. A crucial theme in the exhibition is the theme of choices and dilemmas. And maybe it's not surprising because that was in a way the legacy of my father from his personal experience. So what we try to do in all the spaces, but the last space of the Holocaust and also in the spaces of the genocide in Rwanda is to look at stories of individuals, of communities, of many others, and looking at their choices and dilemmas. It's not always black and white. It's sometimes gray. It's sometimes a story of people that acted, but were also perpetrators, or rescued, but also killed, for example, in Rwanda. And this theme is really, really important for us to make the visitors or the audiences understand actions and understand consequences. And we tell the story of Schindler, but we tell other stories of many individuals, men, women, and children. For example, the train tickets that were sold to Jews in Greece to go to their death. Who is the perpetrator in that case? The person that thought of that idea, the person that printed the tickets, the person that sold the tickets, the conductor that punched the tickets. Those were tickets that were sold for people to go to Auschwitz and their death. Let's think about that, so these are the kind of questions that we are asking. And we ask many, many questions around the dilemmas of how do you remember? How do you seek justice? How do you rebuild your life after genocide or after the Holocaust? So, for example, we tell the story of Carl Wiltons. Carl, of course, is the head or the director of the Rwandan Adventist Development and Relief Agency International during the genocide. And he decided to stay in the country during the genocide as a representative of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He was the only American that stayed in the country. He actually got he evacuated his family to safety, his wife, his children, his parents that were visiting at the time. But he decided to stay, and he helped saving many, many people, including helping Damascus Gisimba, a Hutu director of an orphanage in Kigali, to safeguard and secure the rescue of 400 children and some parents to save their lives. When the militias led by this man, Grégoire, wanted to come into the orphanage and kill those that seek refuge in the orphanage. Carl Wiltons actually went to the then genocidaire Rwandan Prime Minister, Jean Kambanda, and begged him to save the people. And oddly, he agreed, and he did give the order for Grégoire not to enter with the Interahamwe, the militia, and kill those in the orphanage. Damascus Gisimba always used to say, I was there trying to stop the militia from entering. They asked the children to split to two groups, Hutu on one side and Tutsi on the other. But the children, as I always told them, they were one, they should be united. They did not want to separate. And we tell these stories in the exhibition. We also tell the story of Carl coming in 2019 to visit us. And he saw Grégoire, and he was sharing with us his struggle of seeing Grégoire as a human being and accepting him not as this perpetrator only that wanted to kill the people that I tried to save, but to see him also as a human being that made choices. And I want to share with you a very short clip of Grégoire telling the story of his choices and how he views his responsibility as a perpetrator. We have 24 films in the exhibition, including films with interviews with perpetrators done by director Adam Mazzo and the Coexist project in Boston, the United States.
Wenda umuntu ashyiraho urwo ruhare rwa guverinoma, ariko guverinoma ntago ariba mu mutima w'umuntu. Ari umwe mu bayobozi b'urwego rw'ibanze mu mujyi wa Kigali, nyobora segiteri Nyakabanda. Nkaba rero nashishikarije abanyarwanda kwica abatutsi mu gihe cya jenoside muri 1994. 12 unteganya ko nk'ibihumbi 8 cyangwa 9 baguye muri iyo segiteri. Ntabwo nigize ngira uruhare mu kwica, ariko mu gushishikariza abantu mu gutegura iyo gahunda yo kwica, ndumva ari ngiye waba uri kwisonga, kuko iyo nza kumera nk'ubirwanya ndumva nta kiba cyarabaye.
Mbere zaraje ndumva atari ibanga.
ubundi hariho gahunda yo kuvuga ko umututsi agiye kutwambura ubutegetsi twebwe abahutu. Biba ngombwa rero ko habaho ko na leta kuko imera nk'idushyigikira kuko ntawe yigeze ahanirwa icyo kintu, cyane cyane ko ibyo bintu bikoze nabitekereje nabigambiriye, ubwo rero n'igihano ngomba kucyakira kuko wari uyoboye guverinoma tuvuge ko yari atuye mu Kiyovu, njye nari ntuye mu Nyakabanda, ese yaraje ampereza imbunda, ampereza umupanga, ampereza iki cya gutema wa mukecuru duturanye? Icyaha ni gatozi ku muntu.
Sorry. I'm trying to get rid of it, sorry. So these are interesting conversations, not only from the side of the victims, but bystanders, perpetrators, collaborators, and more. Now, with the closure of the building in the lockdowns that we had, Sarah, you just spoke about it, and all the challenges that we had in 2020 and 2021, we had to rethink. We were only open for 1 year. We opened officially in March 2019. And by March 2020, we had to close for months, and again in 2021. So we had to rethink. And what we did is we moved virtually, very much like you did in Chhange. We moved to webinars and to podcasts and to have diverse speakers and to have virtual tours and to do online teaching and to just try and really get us thinking about new methodologies of learning. We recognized the dangers to democracy, and started a new series about sleepwalking through the assault on democracy. We recognized the need to speak about resilience and hope. So Sarah Brown was a guest of ours in few podcasts, together with other wonderful friends and scholars, to speak about resilience in Rwanda and in the Holocaust, about hope, about rebuilding lives. And these are very, very important. So I do hope that you can visit our YouTube channel and website and podcast and Spotify, SoundCloud, and so on to listen to some of those things. And the reality is that in South Africa, many people, many kids, many schools do not have access to the internet. They do not have access to data. They do not have computers. So what did we do with that? So we recorded testimonies of survivors, short, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. We created voice notes. We sent it to over 200 schools on WhatsApp, working with NGOs on the ground. So we had to think about new ways of teaching. We had to open our gates, but work with masks and work with small groups, because that is how we had to do it. And when we reopened, we also had to do hybrid stuff. And that is exciting because it allows you to innovate all the time on the ground. And another program that is really exciting, and I'm coming to the end of my talk, is a youth leadership program that we run in Africa. It started in 2017 in South Africa and Rwanda, and it is a partnership with Aegis Trust in Rwanda and our centers in South Africa. And it's a youth leadership program called the Change Makers program that is run in South Africa. This year, the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Centre ran few wonderful projects. We did it in Johannesburg. And we just came back from Zambia and did a wonderful project in Zambia. We are using temporary exhibitions that now stay permanently. Those exhibitions about the Holocaust, about genocide, about Rwanda, about apartheid are permanently on display in Mozambique, Nigeria, the Gambia, Rwanda, and Zambia. And more is coming. We launched it, as I said, in 13 countries. We teach about case studies of extremism, and we help each country to develop their own case study of extremism in their own environment, maybe a civil war, or a religious extremism, or colonial extremism, or any other examples. And as I'm finishing, I thought it would be really fun to see, just 2 weeks ago in Zambia, a short 2 minutes video of participants reflecting on the program. So let's have a quick look.
How do we prepare future leaders to fight against extremism and enable them with skills and knowledge to promote pluralism? How do we prepare them to fight against any kind of prejudice and stereotypes?
It is such a pleasure to do the Changemakers program in Zambia, because you can see already this young group of leaders making the connections to Zambia, to some of the issues that they are encountering, if it is issues of differences and othering, if it is political issues or tribal issues. You see the connections are made now, in real time. Our hopes are that all these young leaders become facilitators. They will facilitate the program in churches, in schools, in universities. They will spread the word and train more trainers.
I have to appreciate the organizers for this training. It's a life-changing training, and if we all uphold it, I'm sure our lives will be touched. How do we use it in Zambia? We have to go out there and form small groups and communities and teach the people that were not here, our brothers and sisters, so that together we promote issues of love, we promote issues of peace, issues of equality, as opposed to issues of hatred. We teach our people out there to coexist as one people created in the image of God.
It's a program that needs to go, even in countries that may not seem to have divisions. I think it's important. There is a saying that prevention is better than cure.
The youth, be a voice of change, be a person that will not watch and do nothing. When you find somebody speaking negatively about a certain tribe that you are not part of, don't stand and support.
As a youth, the change that you would want to see in others starts with you. Be the change out there.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful program that is empowering the youth of today using examples of the history of the Holocaust and of genocide. And it's not a magic wand. South Africa, that suffered crimes against humanity and apartheid and should know better, is still struggling with racism, and mainly with xenophobia and Afrophobia and the hate of the other. And since 2008, we are having such waves of horrific murders of immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers from other African countries. So what we try to do is to empower our youth to make connections between the past of the Holocaust and become upstanders, change makers today. We, for example, publish this book, Brother, that you can access on the website. And we teach young people through images from our communities about the fact that discrimination and prejudice and othering did not end in 1945 or in July 1994. It's still with us, and we still need to make connections and learn. So all learners visiting the center leave a message on what they have learned after their educational program. And they are encouraged to think about actions that they would like to take moving forward. And one such message that I would like to quote from one 14-year-old student said, "I turn a blind eye when my family says foreigners must go back to their country. Now I will put my foot down. I will not condone it." Finally, in the end of our exhibition, we have photos of two survivors, both volunteers at our center. Irene Klaas, who survived the Warsaw Ghetto, and Sylvester Sendakieye, who survived the massacre in the church in the church near Murambi. They said that the world did not learn, that never again was not their reality. The question is, can it become ours? Thank you very much.
Tali, thank you so much for sharing your personal journey, your center's journey, the particular journey that you're experiencing during this pandemic, which is unfortunately ongoing. Every time I interact with you, I learn more, and I found myself just taking a tremendous amount of notes. I don't think I realized that you and I had 2004 in common, that was the first time you traveled to Rwanda.
Yes.
That's
yes.
fascinating also for me. And so it's just so interesting. And it just seems to have been such an interesting turning point for you too. I want to open it up, by the way, to everyone. I'm immediately talking to Tali. Sorry, I can't help myself. It's so interesting. But we are opening it up now for questions. Should you have any questions for Tali, please enter them into the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. I know one that I was thinking about, and this is a rather personal question, Tali, about connections and this sense of connection with survivors or descendants of survivors from other instances of genocide. It seems to me that you had this very powerful connection with Kokos. And I was curious if some of those connections continue to this day, even when you're in Zambia, even wherever it is that you're traveling, if you're finding that you bridge that divide, what divides may have otherwise existed because you have that sense of shared identity.
Such a good question, Sarah, because the question for all of us in memory, in museums, in memorial spaces, education spaces is, can we make the connection to the victims themselves, the survivors, to their families, and then can other victim groups or other genocide survivors make the connection, even if their story is not there? Or if their story is there, can they see our spaces as entry point to develop their story further? And for me, that is a key question. So one, we must keep in touch. So we have a survivors group that meets. Before COVID, met all the time, now much more difficult. But every time that we have sort of a stop in the waves, we try to bring the survivors for coffee, to have a conversation. We do small exhibitions with them. We published a book, the 3 centers in South Africa, a book called Portraits of Survival, about their stories. We're in touch with their families. And the same will be with others. So it's so wonderful to have Maud and Pinchas with us, because Maud lives, of course, in the United States. Pinchas lives in Toronto, but we are in touch. We're in touch. We always develop stories and learn from them. And that is very important. And finally, this entry point is not only to genocide. So I'm thinking about refugees from the DRC that settled in South Africa. And they did the long journey from what was then Zaire and then DRC, and very difficult journey. There are refugees, asylum seekers, many times stateless people in South Africa. And they were inspired by the stories of survivors. So we created an exhibition about their story. It's called My Congo, My Story. And we captured their story. And that is important. Those connections with other communities are so important. Sarah, I wanted to actually ask you, you saw the memorials in 2004 in Rwanda, and then you saw them after. How do you reflect on the changes? Just very shortly, I'm quite interested, and I'm sure everyone will be interested in your reflections and mine about it.
I appreciate you turning it on me. It was interesting when I saw the photograph that you shared, and that looked like it was Ntarama. That looked like
yes,
Ntarama.
Ntarama.
It was such a familiar photo. It brought me right back to 2004 when I visited Ntarama Nyamata with a survivor, whose family, the majority of his family is buried in Nyamata. And I remember it looking like that. The bricks were still askew from the damage that had been done during the genocide. Even though it was 10 years later, the scars on the building were very much present, and there were still stains on the walls, and there were bags of remains and clothing that were, I think it not out of a sense of disregard or because people didn't care, but because there was just an absence of resources. Everything felt a bit forgotten and left aside. And I remember feeling at once relief when the government got involved and there were initiatives that were undertaken to preserve these spaces. But it is sometimes difficult to visit more recently because in some ways, the uniqueness of each of these memorials and the ownership of the local survivor community has now been, in some instances, really overtaken by the government's ownership of the space. And I think that that's a natural progression, and I think that that has led to better preservation efforts. But sometimes I do worry about the local narrative being lost in there as well.
Yeah. Sarah, and for all of you that are with us, think about Holocaust memorials and Holocaust sites 10 years after. Don't think about it in 2000, 2005, 2010. Think about them in 1955, Auschwitz in 1955, Majdanek in 1955. And for me, many times I need to remember that there was a lot of work, actually 50 years after, 60 years after, in Holocaust memory. I always think about 2005 and the opening of the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin. It took 60 years to open a memorial, and Rwanda is only 27 years after. South Africa, only 27 years after. So it does take time, and I think there's no magic wand, sadly.
And there's no one way to do this. I mean, that's what we're learning as we go. I think that one of the most tremendous successes, in a way, of Rwanda's reconstruction and rehabilitation efforts has been the fact that they do not silence survivors. Survivors are front and center and play a really key role in a number of different organizations, advocating for and working with the government to ensure that commemoration is meaningful, that it's impactful, that it's not just about learning, but also, like what you were saying, inspiring action and ensuring that the future of Rwanda is much brighter than its past. So yeah, it's really, thank you for the question though. We actually have a question from one of our local, one of our docents, actually our volunteer docents who works in our exhibit. And she asks, it's another personal question. You said that you did not make the real-time connection to what was happening in Rwanda back in April, May, June, July of 1994. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because of course the journey from 1994 to now, when I'm older and more experienced, makes my connections much quicker now. Now I see something and I make the connection. So to give you an example, last year COVID started, refugees in our communities did not get any help. They were actually kept out even from little grants of money that the government was giving to local businesses of 350 rands. Because they were refugees, they did not get any help. So we were in lockdown, so we were closed, just security was in the building. And we opened the building to collect food. We became a food collection for the refugee community, because you make the connection much quicker. So within a day, we opened our gates and we did that. But in 1994, I was too busy celebrating Nelson Mandela. I was too busy thinking about, phew, look at this wonderful story of peace, of democracy, of good against evil, of life celebrated. And I don't think that I did not know, even though the media was in South Africa, the media was not in Rwanda. It wasn't covered as genocide. It was covered as a civil war, as a conflict for a long time. But that doesn't matter, no excuses. It was there on CNN in full color, and I could not make the connection in real time. So for me, that was the lesson, because I started to work with survivors very soon after. Already in 1995, 1996, I was in an NGO called the Foundation for Tolerance Education. And already we did a program with survivors that came to South Africa for medical treatment. And we did program in schools in 1995, 1996 about Rwanda. So I made the connection, but it took me time. And Maggie, I think we need to make those connections quicker. And you need to ask yourselves during COVID, when we are so busy with our own sort of existential sort of fears, and when there are issues, nationalism, populism, and other issues, in our communities, do we make the connections to China or to Myanmar or to, or to other things? Do we act? Do we act in real time? Or do we wait for others to act? So these are the kind of questions that we need to ask ourselves, I think.
Tali, many times when we have younger learners, so those who were not born in 1994 or following the news in 1994, oftentimes when they come into the exhibit, they're shocked to find out about the genocide in 1994. And one of the first questions we're asked is, did people know? And we have there an original, the cover of Time magazine, which came out in the middle of the genocide, that said there are no devils left in hell, they're all in Rwanda. I mean, people knew. It was the front cover of a massive print publication. And when we show it to them, they're so taken aback at this idea that everyone knew and nobody did anything. And it's one of those moments where we then leap forward and say, well, what's going on in your social media feed right now? What are you reading about? What are the headlines that you're ignoring?
Yeah,
it's a teaching moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I always remember Samantha Power in A Problem from Hell, quoting Patricia Schroeder, a Colorado congresswoman at the time in 1994, saying that she's trying to activate people in Colorado to get involved and to speak out about Rwanda. But they are really concerned about the mountain gorillas, not so much about the people, so, and that those words are very much sort of stays with me, that, yeah, it's difficult. It's really, really difficult. But that's the reason museums such as ours, yours, programs such as ours and yours are so important, because we are, at least telling the story that you cannot say, I did not know.
And teaching people to foster those connections, and not just to make the connections, but then to have that political will, that courage to act on them, to do something meaningful, even if it's in a very local community focused sort of way, that can have that ripple effect that is so powerful and meaningful.
Absolutely, absolutely. So someone is asking for some details. So let me very quickly put our website here.
Yes, and
which will take you, actually, in the bottom of the website, you have links to the podcast, links to the YouTube channel, and you're very welcome to just go download free publications, virtual tours, testimonies, anything, and whatever you need to access is just very, very easy.
And Wayne, don't worry, we will also send out some of these resources as well as a recording of this conversation in a follow-up email. So stay tuned and we'll get all of those out to you. I have a question that was actually sent to me via chat over here, which is asking about, now in South Africa, you have 3 centers for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, yours in Johannesburg, but then also Durban and Cape Town, correct?
Yes.
How did that partnership, or how does the collaboration come about? The creation of these 3 centers, and how does it work? How is it going?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and I'm so happy that we have actually representatives from the 2 centers. So I saw my colleague Mary Klook, the director of the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Centre, and Linda Heckner, the director of education of the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Centre, here with us. And Cape Town was really the first center, 1999, first in Africa. even before Kigali, before Mauritius, before anyone, doing amazing, amazing work. Durban was next in 2008, and we were sort of the baby center. But what we do is very unique. We have an association of the 3 centers in South Africa, and it's called the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation. And it allows us to really work together, which is wonderful. So we can share resources. So for example, the publication about survivors, we did it together, worked together, published it together, fundraised together, and that allows us to do a lot, like films and events. And I recommend to every museum around the world to work in partnership. And I love our partnership, Sarah and team, with Chhange, because I think that for the last years now, you spoke for us a few times on webinars and podcasts, and I spoke for you. And I think this partnership, like we have in South Africa, is beneficial for everyone.
No, it very much, for me, reminds me of what we do, all of the different centers that exist in New Jersey alone under the Commission for Holocaust Education. There are a lot of partnerships that have been facilitated. And I also love, it's like a very thin but powerful silver lining to this pandemic has been this idea that with the transition to so many virtual platforms, we've also kind of eschewed geographic limitations. Our thinking has expanded. And so I was so proud and delighted when one of South Africa's high schools registered for our colloquium, our virtual colloquium in May, and we had representation from South Africa, and that was entirely because of our partnership with you and your center. And so I think that if there's one wonderful lesson that was learned from this, it is definitely that opportunity to reach across the pond even and make these connections irregardless of continents and oceans that separate us.
Absolutely. And I just want to do a shout out to the GSI, the Generation of the Shoah International. And I see Esther here with us, the wonderful Esther Finder. But just to say, even that coming together of partners from all around the world, Australia and the United States and Mexico and Africa, and just allowing organizations and individuals to find out what others are doing and opening an umbrella of so much that you can access. So I think partnerships, and that's maybe the silver lining of this terrible, challenging time, that we can actually partner globally and we can learn from each other globally so much. And that is, for me, it was a wonderful thing. I listen to things almost every day and I learn so much, and that is in itself wonderful.
Yeah, I do love whenever I can get, and I love when you make recordings of the programs you put on, because sometimes I can't attend them in real time, and you've just done such a great job of making them accessible. And so I'm going to, I'm going to end us on that high note, because Tali, this was a really wonderful and inspirational talk, and I so appreciate you sharing your time with us. Again, your knowledge, your expertise. I'm so grateful to everyone who is here in attendance. I do want to note that this is a somewhat emotional program for me, because in addition to having Maud present, Pinchas Guter is someone who I've taught his story to students from all over the country and even internationally. And every time I ask Pinchas to sing on his Dimensions and Testimony program, it brings me to tears, and to see Pinchas here is a moment that was very emotional. I'm sorry if anyone caught me crying at the beginning. It was because I realized Pinchas was here, and Tali, I found out from my staff that you facilitated that, and thank you. So a very, very warm thanks to all of the members and the people who are in attendance, to our survivors. It's just a blessing to have you with us, and I hope all of you, thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful day. Stay well, stay safe, and happy holidays to everyone who is celebrating.